Then, okay. Thanks for joining us. This is Sarah Jones with Politicus Radio. Joining me to talk about Donald Trump and the media's confusion and how to deal with him is Politicus USA's editor-in-chief Jason Easley. There's been a lot of dialogue among media members regarding how best to cover Donald Trump and whether or not we should call out lies as lies. This confusion about reality is feeding right into Donald Trump's propaganda efforts and is in fact a result the Russians work to achieve when trying to infiltrate and undermine a country. What do you see, Jason, as the challenges and prescription for those challenges in covering a person whose lies are so enormous it's impossible to give the proper context in a regular news article?
The challenge for the press, I believe, is timidity. They have been told for decades by the right that there's liberal media bias, so they've intentionally trained themselves to not to bend over backwards to treat the Republican point of view, even as far away from reality as it was, as fact. So now they're confronted with a man who overtly lies. Lies often, lies frequently, lies every single day, not almost every single day. And they are battling with themselves over whether or not they should describe it as lies. They're trying to Trump is taking advantage of decades of training that the Republican Party has done to the media in this country to make them as pro-Republican as possible.
Gaming the ref is what I would call it.
They're working the ref, yeah. So, but now they're faced with somebody who lies so heinously so often that it's an insult. And it makes one question the credibility of journalists who pass that information on without commenting on its factual lack.
I think that's a good point, and I also think that it's a challenge because it's almost impossible it is impossible to give proper context. It's like you're writing an article about something Donald Trump said. You only have X amount of words to do so. You have to say, he said X. This isn't true, but to give context to the fact that he said this isn't true, I mean, you're talking about a little sapling in a forest full of lies, and it's really hard, and I think that this is part of gaslighting of America, is that it is hard for the media to do that. It's hard for the audience to absorb all that. Nobody really wants to read that, this whole long litany of his lies. In fact, I was writing about the Russia connections long before the election, and it really seemed like the American people didn't care. And now, of course, this is a crisis level.
Yeah, and there's still a lot of don't care. I don't think they quite comprehend, and I think a lot of that problem goes back to television. A lot of the constriction you're talking about really applies to television,
right.
Which is why the print coverage of Trump has been so much better
right.
than the television coverage of Trump. Because Trump understands television. He does understand television, and he understands that the television doesn't have a lot of time. So you say it simply, you say it quickly, and no one really has the time to spend 20 minutes a night debunking all this.
Rachel Maddow does, but I mean, in general, the thing with television, when I was doing the news and when I was working as a producer in TV, it's all about that soundbite, and you want to get a soundbite. It's not part of a larger narrative, and so he knows how to do that. He knows how to drop a soundbite in that everybody chases, that it's good for eyeballs for them. And the other thing is that you brought up, and I see this really in television, conservatives have sort of swept television, and now it's become this horrible sort of he said, she said, and then everybody tries to get along and say, well, we don't want to say that he's a liar. We should wait and see what he does. And it's all about sort of, it's about individual ego showing that they're better than other people by not jumping the gun on this, quote unquote. But it's also just this sort of culture of people who hang out together. And when you're doing that, you really don't want to be, actually, let me clarify that liberals tend to not want to be antagonistic, and I think that's a problem liberals are facing right now, is they bend over backwards to show that they're open-minded. They bend over backwards to account for their own biases, or even with the press is dealing personally with issues of not liking Donald Trump because he's picked on them or friends of theirs or their colleagues. Personally, he's mocked reporters. He is already threatening the First Amendment, so the press has many reasons to not like him, and I think that sometimes you see them trying to adjust for that the same way that they adjust in this sort of gaming the ref way, and it all works to allow these lies to sit unchallenged.
And there's a bit of fallacy involved in television, especially, overstatement of Trump's power. 54% of voters did not vote for Donald Trump. So if you want a sizable audience, it is not the pro-Trump audience that is loud and vocal. It is the non-Trump audience. That's the majority of the country. So instead of bending over to accommodate a minority because they're loud and angry and they threaten.
Right.
The media in this country really should be talking to the majority who are asking themselves, what the hell is going on here?
What they're doing is what I was just talking about. In television, they hunt for drama, and so they go after the angry conservatives. They did it with the Tea Party. Remember that when CNN did that special, and it was 3 Tea Partiers, and meanwhile, Occupy Wall Street had I can't remember if it was hundreds or thousands of people on that day, but it was a huge disparity, and they followed the story of the Tea Partiers. Well, I don't know if it's a conservative bias or if it's just because they give a better story. They have good visuals usually. They come prepared with their, their flag and their angry and their weird costumes and all of that, and it sells television. But what you're saying, and I think this is so true, that the real challenge we have is the job of the media, the press, was supposed to be for the people, and it has become the opposite of that. And in this it's dangerously close to being propaganda for Trump, and not because these people, I wouldn't say they're complicit at all with Donald Trump. I mean, I think there are pockets of that, but that's not the overarching problem. The overarching problem is all of these different vulnerabilities. The news isn't the loss leader anymore. It has to entertain, and it's become a show instead of information. And people say they want information, but then when they're given it, that isn't the popular thing. So, this is a huge problem. It can't be addressed in just one way. But one example of Trump's lies is, he kept saying WikiLeaks. He would call on WikiLeaks and use that information during the campaign to smear Hillary Clinton. And now he says that the Russian hacks had no impact on the election. And the media is all, we've got to let him, he's right, we can't prove that it had an impact on the election. Well, I mean, that is... I'm incredulous that anyone would say that. You have to be willfully blind to believe that those hacks had no impact on an election. It was all anyone talked about.
That's the whole problem. See, the media, if they were to admit that the hacks impacted the election, would have to admit that their coverage of the hacks impacted the election.
Exactly. I said that earlier when you weren't here. Yeah,
they're consistent talking about the hacks, the emails, and things derived from the hacks influenced the election.
They never should have covered those emails. That was a mistake. That I think the media needs to deal with. How are you going to handle this kind of material? And it was obvious that it was coming from Russia. I mean, you couldn't say that 100%, but all the signs pointed there. And when the intel community said that was the time to stop reporting on that stuff. But we don't have this kind of responsible media. They were. The way they went after Hillary Clinton and the way they've gone after Barack Obama compared to this weird leeway they're giving this man who's already proven. Fear, yes. That we saw a lot of this kind of same behavior under George W. Bush, but it's a lot worse right now, and I think it's going to get even worse than that.
Because Bush never personally threatened.
No, Bush had, my God, compared to President Bush, Donald Trump is... Bush is a gentleman and a scholar and conducted himself with the utmost, responsibility in office compared to Donald Trump. Hasn't even gotten in office yet, and he's already creating these destabilizing situations.
Most journalists, we have to admit, aren't like you and I. If Donald Trump's 18 million followers would come after us, I would be pretty much like, okay, let's do this. Because we're different. We're independent. We're not corporate. We can say that. We can do whatever we want to do. But if you're a reporter at a big mainstream corporate organization, Trump's followers start screaming and contacting your boss and everything else.
Well, they've done that to... You see how many times they've done that to me. And I'm going to contact your boss and get you fired. And I love to write them back and tell them I am the boss. So that's fun for me. But if I wasn't the boss, that would be a threat.
Yeah, that's a lot of the fear factor that's involved.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I think we need to wrap this up today. In terms, we're going to start doing these podcasts every day because the only way to talk about Donald Trump is to deal with stuff on a daily basis. So you can check in with us and follow our podcast, and we look forward to hearing your comments and hope you guys have a great evening. Thank you.